Greetings! Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova, and in today's segment I'll be talking about Darwin's dastardly deception, also No More Mr. Nice Guy, and my appearance on my work being acknowledged on James Tour's channel favorably, and for which I'm deeply honored. So Darwin's Dastardly Deception, that is the title and theme of a booklet I'm working on that I hope to distribute free of charge to equip critics of evolution, namely creationists and ID proponents, with arguments that are, I believe, far more effective than the ones that are currently in use. Some of the arguments by creationists are so obsolete. They're not quite as crisp in light of all the knowledge that has been discovered in the last 15 years, particularly because the cost of DNA analysis, the analysis of genes, has a process which we call gene sequencing or DNA sequencing. The price of this has dropped by a factor of 1 million to 1 billion over the last 40 years. That means for the cost of $1,000 today, we could do experiments and make observations and measurements that would have cost $1 trillion, say around 40 years ago. And so we know a lot more now that we didn't before. And it has not been good news for evolutionary biology. Up until this time, it was easy for evolutionists to be able to put forward their speculations as if they were empirical facts, particularly Darwin's theory of survival of the fittest. And I'll get more into that as we move forward. I also am going to mention that you're going to see a slight, maybe a not so subtle change in tone toward my critics, such as Dr. Daniel Stern Cardinale and Zachary Hancock and Dapper Dino. I had extended olive branches to them for like 6 years, and we had a cordial and productive relationship as far as my work. But surprisingly, I also have some things to say about people also claiming to be ID proponents and creationists. And this is an opportune time in light of the fact that my work has been acknowledged by Dr. Rob Stadler, who's a distinguished scientist in biomedical engineering, Harvard and MIT PhD. He appeared on Dr. James Tour's channel, and many of you are familiar with Dr. Tour's channel. And he cited my work favorably. That acknowledgement counts for a lot, but really that's, as far as YouTube goes, people say that's just YouTube. But really, to me, that is symbolic of actually work that doesn't get a lot of notice, but has been published in venues that count, namely venues that end up having my publications in university library shelves in the science section, such as my work that was published through Oxford University Press, along with famous creationist Dr. Joe DeWeest, who is a professor of biochemistry both at Freed-Hardeman and Vanderbilt University, and ID proponent and biophysicist Kurt Thurston. We published in Oxford University Press. And along with my mentor, colleague, and former boss, John Sanford, we had published in Springer Nature, which is also a very prestigious venue. The venue said it was particularly for that publication for leading scientists in their field. And so that is a publication and an acknowledgement where it really counts. Also, pleased to report, my work with Dr. DeWeese also appeared in the Federation, a journal for the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology. And then with Dr. DeWeese, Dr. Sanford, and I, we had Our joint publication was cited favorably in peer-reviewed work for the American Society of Microbiology. And so the case for creationism and the case for ideas move forward in that we were able to criticize effectively problems in evolutionary theory. We weren't overtly pro-ID or pro-creationism, but we called out scientific flaws in claims all the way up to the National Academy of Sciences. We had overturned a claim published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and it's a myth about nylon-eating bacteria that has been circulating, and we were able to effectively discredit it, and our work was recognized through the American Society for Microbiology. And unsurprisingly, it was, even though the American Society of Microbiology recognized and authenticated our work, the important portions anyway, all the evolutionary biology journals wanted nothing to do with us. So it goes to show you how biased they are, even when evolutionists themselves will admit we were right. I put this on the table to point out I need to settle to set the record straight on what some creationists who I think are jealous of my work and who also misunderstand it and misunderstand when I actually have to say there are certain creationist arguments that don't hold water. And there are also some of the conduct of creationists, such as Kent Hovind, are extremely questionable, and I've taken flack for this. But let me point out one of these individuals. His name is Paul Price. He was a telemarketer for Creation Ministries International. 6 years ago, he had contacted my boss at the time, John Sanford, and John Sanford's still I consider a colleague, mentor, and friend. But at the time, he was saying negative things behind my back to John Sanford about me. And it seems to me, and I had known at the time, Dr. Sanford passed that email on to me, so I know what Paul Price was saying from the get-go. And thankfully, Dr. Sanford dismissed it, and I remained an employee of Dr. Sanford, and about 18 months later, 12 to 18 months later, we published together in a prestigious venue, Springer Nature, the handbook of the mathematics of the arts and sciences, and there are subsequent publications in the works, and there were indeed improvements, and I hope what I consider corrections to some things to the 2004 book, Genetic Entropy by John Sanford. And my joint publication with Dr. Sanford reflects some of my contributions to the work in population genetics. But Paul Price, who a lot of this, he was a political science major and then a telemarketer for CMI. A lot of what I had to say just went totally over his head. He would have nothing to do with it and just tried to go behind my back to get me fired because he didn't understand what I was saying, and he disagreed with stuff he totally didn't understand, and he tried to do damage to my reputation, and I'm glad to say he hasn't been able to do much. I have since moved forward, and I was on a creationist-friendly YouTube channel over the last 2 years. I've gotten 250,000 views and have gotten this recognition for that. But that's just YouTube. What really counts is peer-reviewed publications, and there are many in the pipeline. And one reason I'm a PhD student now is I was recruited by prominent creationists like Andy McIntosh, who kind of almost dragged me kicking and screaming. And, I got a call from Andy McIntosh, said, look, you need to dial this number. I told the dean to be expecting your phone call. And I'm like, what? And it was like, well, you need to talk to Dean Horstemeyer at Liberty. I told him you're going to call him in the next hour because you need to be a PhD student there. And I got invited on the spot. So Paul Price, all your naysaying and assailing of my work hasn't really slowed me down that much. It's just been a nuisance, honestly. And I can see why evolutionists like Zachary Hancock would rather debate you than me. Paul Price doesn't really have what it takes to swing in the big leagues. He's a political science student. He doesn't have the depth of population genetics that I do. He doesn't have the depth of mathematics and biophysics and engineering that's required to prosecute this. So they'll rather debate people like Paul Price than debate someone like me. And so I just had to settle that score and set the record straight, because some nasty rumors have circulated about me, even in the creationist and ID community. But I'm pleased to say that both in the creationist community and in the ID community, I've been well received. I've been invited to numerous conferences to speak at private Discovery Institute events. So much for what people like that have had to say about me, including Barry Arrington at the now defunct Uncommon Descent blog. So a little bit sorry for the sour grapes here, but I felt I had to set the record straight. And my work being favorably cited by a distinguished scientist on James Stewart's channel is a good opportunity to finally set the record straight. And that also leads to some of my critics who are big Kent Hovind lovers. Kent Hovind is a creationist who is convicted of 42 counts of felony counts, and sent to jail. So he's whatever his inmate number is. He's also been married 4 times and divorced 4 times, with all 4 wives filing for divorce, including one that was a victim of domestic violence as recognized by the courts, and Kent Hovind was convicted of domestic violence against his wife number 3. And not to mention Kent Hovind's science really sucks, and I would not recommend that people follow him or go to his dinosaur adventureland and take their families there. A child died, drowned to death at Dinosaur Adventureland. So, I mean, if you fear for your child's safety, you should take that into consideration. But I've taken flack for standing up against what I think are bad arguments by creationists and bad behavior. It says in the Bible that if someone's not teaching the right thing, you should mark that man and have nothing to do with him. And so bad behavior should be called out. Stuff that is wrong should be called out. Doesn't matter if they claim the name of Christ. I have been in a documentary talking about pastors that were doing some pretty shady dealings, and I filed along with 5 other plaintiffs, God bless them, illegal probes to get all this financial malfeasance exposed. And I'm pleased to report, by God's grace, a documentary was made in the wake of our legal probe, and a couple million people have watched that documentary, which, by the way, has a few segments of me in that documentary, of yours truly. That documentary, by the way, is called The Real David Platt. And so there's been a lot of corruption in the church. There has been some corruption in the creationist movement, and it's disgusting. And I call out Kent Hovind for being at the forefront of some of those shenanigans. And I've taken flack for it, because I'm not when I see bad behavior, even by people on my own side, I feel a responsibility to call it out because it reflects badly on me. Their bad behavior, just by indirect association, not only does it reflect badly on me, it reflects badly on creationism, and really the larger case for Christianity. So, with that aside, I now have to take issue and be no more Mr. Nice Guy to certain evolutionists. And one of them is a colleague who I've respected and appreciated, Dr. Daniel Stern Cardinale. I had extended an olive branch to him sometime last year. I said, okay, I will try. You've told me to go ahead and attend evolution conferences. And I did. And by the way, as you'll see, I got the most views for my talk of any talk among the hundreds that were provided at that evolution conference. I got the most viewed presentation on their official YouTube channel, and thank God they have still let my talk be aired there. And I was expecting Dr. Cardinale would show some appreciation for my effort and at least invite to have a discussion. I would have welcomed a discussion with him where I had a chance to answer his objections to what I said. But instead, he with Zachary Hancock did a 2-hour hit piece on my 13-minute presentation. 2 hours. It was full of misrepresentations about what was actually said, and then also false statements about facts and just flooding of misunderstandings. I provided citations which they didn't really even explore, which was pathetic. Citations of literature, evolutionary literature, that would actually defend my case, but no, they wouldn't do that. They also don't understand protein biology very well. And I've also given a couple videos where Dr. Daniel Stern Cardinale doesn't even understand basic biochemistry. You'll see it on this channel, on Evidence and Reasons channel. And there's going to be an upcoming video where I show that his accusations that my math was wrong, it's not. I have a degree. One of my 5 degrees is in mathematics. Another is in physics, applied physics from Johns Hopkins University. I have probably way more math than Dr. Cardinale. And so I'm going to settle that score, and it's going to be a reckoning time for him. He doesn't know his math as well as he claims. And in the process, one of his heroes, Grauer, an evolutionary biologist named Grauer, I found the guy's just a total buffoon as I read the paper. Dr. Dan insisted I read Grauer's paper. And I read it. I said, that just reinforced my opinion of him, that the guy's a total joke. It was hilarious. And it's like, well, Dr. Dan thinks that just because I haven't studied evolutionary biology and all the nonsense he studied and subscribes to, that somehow I'm not capable of critiquing it. But when it comes to the area of math, like a lot of evolutionary biologists, except for the population geneticists, are terrible at math. But even someone like Grauer, who's claiming to use some population genetic math, it really sucked. And I could see it. I mean, you'd have to go into some things like L'Hopital's rule for indeterminate forms to see the connection to it where he failed. It was hilarious. But then there's some basic high school math that I think Dr. Dan just doesn't get. And so, dude, it's time to, you did a 2-hour hit piece on me. And by the way, with your partner, Zach Hancock, that was 2 hours. And then that's in addition to Zach Hancock spending another 2 hours on Dapper Dino's channel criticizing my work. And I wouldn't even be allowed very much into the comment section. I was a moderator at that time, and I kept posting stuff on the comment section, and then my mod privileges were removed by Dapper Dino. And I'm just like, dude, this is so cowardly. If Zach wants to criticize my work, I've invited him to talk to me. Instead, he'll spend 4 hours hiding away, and he'll debate creationists like Paul Price, but he won't actually have a discussion with me. And I consider that really cowardly. But that kind of tells me it's like, dude, that's the sort of behavior of someone who wants to who kind of knows he's gonna be in for a fight, that he could be called out on a lot of things. And you know, in the intervening 6 years since I debated Dr. Dan on modern day debate, there's been a lot of data that has flooded in favor of my claims. And also I have found in the archives, and also thanks to the powerful search engines of AI, I've found a lot of material by people on his side that agree with what I have to say. And this is just going to make it really embarrassing. So I could see why I'm not, Dr. Dan's not that eager to, I think, have a conversation with me anymore. And, that last hit piece he did, it's like, okay, this settles it. No more Mr. Nice Guy. I'm not holding back. I'm gonna take a few digs at the stuff he said that I think need to be called out. And they need to be called out. And it's going to help. It's going to help settle, because these issues will come up in my upcoming booklet. And I can anticipate what he might say, and he'll say I didn't do this or that. I'm going to lay this all out in rigorous detail on this channel, so that the things that I say in the booklet, which is meant for the popular audience, if they want to get down into the weeds, they'll actually see the details. They'll see the details where they're fleshed out. They'll see the citations in rigorous and often boring detail, but they'll see that I've made my case. I have waited till this moment to write the booklet because I wanted to be assured that we would have a mountain of evidence and references and have them all prepared. And there have been some publications recently that have totally vindicated me by evolutionary biologists themselves, and even statements by evolutionary biologists themselves, such as Brett Weinstein, who on the Joe Rogan show said, his colleagues, that is his evolutionary biologist colleagues, are lying to themselves. They're lying to themselves. And it's like, well, yeah, I could have told you that 10 years ago. These guys are lying to themselves. It's kind of nice to know that one of their own is finally calling it out. And he said modern Darwinism is broken. Modern Darwinism is broken. So all these 150 years or more of Darwin being the pillar of evolutionary biology, it's like it's broken. I could have told you that 20 years ago, but now, because of people like Brett Weinstein and numerous others coming out of the closet, it's so easy now to criticize evolutionary biology. And then we have the kind of the frenemy, not the friend, not necessarily the enemy, or not necessarily our friend either, of the case for intelligent design, the third way of evolution. And that includes Dennis Noble, who was the examiner of famous evolutionary propagandist Richard Dawkins. He was the PhD examiner of Dawkins, and he's criticizing Dawkins' work. And we'll cover a little bit of Dawkins today. So it's so much easier now. And so I get a little bit rattled. I get a little bit upset, not just rattled. I get upset to hear creationists losing debates, using antiquated, obsolete arguments when it's so easy. Am I the one bringing this to the table? Yes and no. The arguments against evolution, the most pointed ones, are by evolutionary biologists themselves of high rank, such as Eugene Koonin, Masatoshi Nei, Michael Lynch, but you have to be willing to dig through their stuff. You have to be willing to know the right search terms. And I've known this because this was my job. I worked for world famous genetic engineer John Sanford. It was my job to learn this. It was my job to learn evolutionary literature. And man, there are some real gems there. And creationists it's been kind of disturbing. They sometimes cite their own arguments, and sometimes they're not very good. But there's so much stuff available, and that's what the booklet will be about. We have data now, and we can really take the fight to them now if you're willing to. So now let's just cover Darwin's dastardly deception. It was said by Will Provine, a Cornell professor of evolutionary biology, that evolution is the greatest engine of atheism ever invented. Evolution is the greatest engine of atheism ever invented. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that he said this in his Darwin Day celebration remarks. There was a Darwin Day celebration, and he said it in connection. Anyway, whether it was particularly on that day or not, he certainly was a Darwinist. And Darwin was so famous in the United Kingdom that his picture appears on their currency, the 10-pound note. Now, I am so happy to report this, that they've discontinued that note. They're going to destroy, I guess, these notes unless you want a souvenir, but it'll cost you 10 pounds to keep it rather than trade it in. But I'm hoping that someday we'll see that he was totally unworthy of that honor, because his fundamental thesis turns out to be a deception that was, maybe it was an honest mistake in Darwin's day, and I'll give him that. But Darwin's deception was basically, it has his name on it, and these evolutionary biologists have perpetuated it through use of equivocation, extrapolation, circular reasoning, just about all the main logical fallacies and bad faith practices to maintain the illusion that it was good science. And so we'll cover that. Now, there is a metaphysical dimension to Darwin's theory in that its consequence. So if Darwin's theory is the greatest engine of atheism ever created, and notwithstanding that there are some Christians who stupidly profess Darwin and Christianity, notwithstanding that fact, it still is. It has made atheism a lot more feasible, and I'll explain why. And actually, I won't have to. It'll be Richard Dawkins himself. Richard Dawkins wrote the book, The Blind Watchmaker, and it specifically tries to critique William Paley's natural theology, that we can look at the designs in nature and conclude there has to be a creator. Now, independent of the theological stuff, does Darwin's theory explain the designs in nature? I'll mention in passing, and this is a big theological debate, there is a lot of reasons I understand why people may not believe in God, particularly the Christian God. We see a lot of suffering and pain in this world. We also have the fact of the hiddenness of God. God is not as apparent to our senses as the air we breathe. And a lot of Christians say, oh no, he's really apparent. It's like, well, it depends on how you look at it, because in the scriptures themselves it says, surely, this is from Isaiah 45:15, surely you are a God who hides himself. And in Proverbs 25:2, it's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It's the glory of kings to search out a matter. And in the Gospels, it says, Jesus says, I thank thee, Father, Lord God, Father of heaven. I thank you, Heavenly Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. So there are a lot of things that God hides, in addition to sometimes when people really go rogue, God's going to help them. And God will, it says in 2 Thessalonians, I think 2, verse 11 and 12, that God will even send a strong delusion to some people. So the point being is that there's a lot of suffering in the world and that God is hidden. Surely you're a God who hides himself. But the way that people have found faith in God during the rise of modern science is the study of biological systems. Because if we look at biological systems, they seem like exquisite, delicate, very well, ingeniously constructed machines. And if there is a machine, there has to be a machine maker. And Paley's argument is if there is a watch, there has to be a watchmaker. And I find in the modern day, I actually think that's going to be a good argument. And so Richard Dawkins has argued that, and actually Darwin himself, that there's no need of a watchmaker, who the Christians call God, the Christian God, because Darwin was able to show that these exquisite machines arise by themselves. So let me read to you a passage from that book by Richard Dawkins. And here is a cover of the book, The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins. It was a national bestseller, and The Economist says it is as readable and vigorous a defense of Darwinism, as has been published since 1859. And the subtitle reads, Why the Evidence of Evolution Reveals a Universe Without Design. And I'm trying to see if I could get this going here. Okay, we're no longer full screen. And here is a picture of Richard Dawkins on the left, and he will be discussing Paley in relation to Darwin. Paley is a natural theologian several years before Darwin. And so let's go ahead and talk about, let me make a reading taken from The Blind Watchmaker. Now, this is not totally in context, but hopefully we'll read enough that you can get the gist of what is going on. So it says here, this is from the book, The Blind Watchmaker. When Charles Darwin first explained the matter, many people either wouldn't or couldn't grasp it. I myself flatly refused to believe Darwin's theory when I first heard about it as a child. Almost everybody throughout history, up to the second half of the 19th century, has firmly believed in the opposite, the conscious designer theory. Many people still do, perhaps because the true Darwinian explanation of our existence is still remarkably not a routine part of the curriculum of a general education. It is certainly very widely misunderstood. The watchmaker of my title is borrowed from a famous treatise by the 18th century theologian William Paley, his Natural Theology, or Evidences of the Existence and Attributes of the Deity, collected from the Appearances of Nature, published in 1802, is the best-known exposition of the argument from design, always the most influential of the arguments for the existence of a God. It is a book that I greatly admire, for in his own time its author succeeded in doing what I'm struggling to do now. He had a point to make, he passionately believed in it, and he spared no effort to ram it home clearly. He had a proper reverence for the complexity of the living world, and he saw that it demands a very special kind of explanation. The only thing he got wrong, admittedly quite a big thing, was the explanation itself. He gave the traditional religious answer to the riddle, but he articulated it more clearly and convincingly than anybody had before. The true explanation is utterly different, and it had to wait for one of the most revolutionary thinkers of all time. Paley begins natural theology with a famous passage. In crossing a heath, I believe a heath is a hill or of some sort. In crossing a heath, suppose I pitched my foot against a stone and were asked how the stone came to be there. I might possibly answer that, for anything I knew to the contrary, it had lain there forever. Nor would it perhaps be very easy to show the absurdity of this answer. But suppose I had found a watch upon the ground, and it should be inquired how the watch happened to be in that place. I should hardly think the answer which I had before given, that for anything I knew, the watch might have always been there. Paley here appreciates the difference between natural physical objects like stones and designed and manufactured objects like watches. He goes on to expound the precision with which the cogs and springs of a watch are fashioned and the intricacy with which they are put together. If we found an object such as a watch upon a heath, even if we didn't know how it had come into existence, its own precision and intricacy of design would force us to conclude that the watch must have had a maker, that there must have existed at some time and at some place or other an artificer or artificers who formed it for the purpose which we find it actually to answer, who comprehended its construction and designed its use. Nobody could reasonably dissent from this conclusion, Paley insists, yet that is just what the atheist in effect does when he contemplates the nature. For, quote, every indication of contrivance, every manifestation of design which existed in the watch exists in the works of nature, with the difference on the side of nature of being greater or more, and that in degree which exceeds all computation. The wording there is admittedly pretty thick, guys. That's just my commentary. Paley drives his point home with beautiful and reverent descriptions of the dissected machinery of life, beginning with the human eye, a favorite example which Darwin was later to use and which will reappear throughout this book. Paley compares the eye with a designed instrument such as a telescope and concludes there is precisely the same proof that the eye was made for vision as there is that the telescope was made for assisting it. The eye must have a designer, just as the telescope had. Paley's argument is made with passionate sincerity and is informed by the best biological scholarship of his day. But it is wrong, gloriously and utterly wrong. The analogy between telescope and eye, between watch and living organism, is false. All appearances to the contrary. The only watchmaker in nature is the blind forces of physics, albeit deployed in a very special way. And now I really have to interject. I kind of let Dawkins, out of courtesy and in fairness, air his opinion. But Dawkins has not studied physics. I have studied physics. I'm not even a professor of physics. But I have studied physics at the graduate level and engineering at the some parts of it at the graduate level, and biology, and I've studied mathematics. Dawkins has not really excelled at any of those fields, and they are totally relevant to this discussion. So for him, I just have to interrupt this. For him to say the only watchmaker in nature is the blind forces of physics, the blind forces of physics are governed by a variety of laws that can be represented, not completely, but pretty well, on a single page of paper. There are 5 major equations: Hamilton's mechanics, electrodynamics, Maxwell's equations, statistical mechanics, Boltzmann's equations, quantum mechanics, Schrodinger's equation, and general relativity by Einstein's equations. Just 5. I've studied those as part of my graduate curriculum. Now, quantum mechanics it's a peculiar law in that it has components that are deterministic and that also admit randomness. When you admit randomness, it allows things to get naturally disorganized. That's why it's so hard. It's one of the contributing factors why it's so hard to build a machine. Because a machine of any level of sophistication, you will find it's far easier to break than to make. Actually, the law of physics although it makes machines possible, it makes them also improbable, and it also makes it very unlikely that they're going to evolve by themselves. So this was a terribly ignorant statement by Richard Dawkins, who is an evolutionary propagandist, and it was really funny. John Barrow, who received the Templeton Prize in Religion for his work in physics, John Barrow is a very eminent physicist. He's high caliber physicist, and Dawkins was not liking some of the things John Barrow said that were very friendly to to the argument in favor of design. And John Barrow quipped. He said, "Richard, you really don't understand these things because you're not a scientist. You're a biologist." So I just have to say here, he has never once in his book explored physics. I have studied physics. I'm now in the process of showing you, hopefully in my later works, how you can show, like I said, one of the major pillars of physics. There are 5 pillars: classical mechanics, electromagnetic theory, statistical mechanics, quantum mechanics, and relativity. Statistical mechanics will show that both the natural origin of life and Darwinism don't work. Now you have to add some biology, you have to incorporate that into biophysics, but you'll see it. So I just have to interject, okay? So stay tuned for this show, the remainder of this show and upcoming shows where I start to show why physics, when biology is seen through the lens of physics, you will see that this statement is false. And now Dawkins, I think he's really swallowed the Kool-Aid and really believes that physics, the blind forces of physics will cause design. Actually, the opposite. They make possible design, but simultaneously also make it difficult for it to arise spontaneously. My favorite example of this is in statistical mechanics. Okay, by way of analogy, if you had 500 fair coins and you just threw them up into the air and let them land on the floor, about 50% of them will be heads. It's very unlikely they'll be 100% heads based on the law, principles like the law of large numbers and the binomial distribution. This extends all the way to the homochirality of amino acids in life. Statistical mechanics will predict that you would get a 50% mix of left and right-handed, and actually the natural evolution of amino acids in the laboratory is that they will spontaneously start to mix, just like in the left and right hand proportions. Just you would expect randomly tossed coins would have a proportion of 50% heads, 50% tails. This is real physics. Real physics makes improbable. It also it makes improbable fine-tuned machines. It makes it possible, but simultaneously improbable. So Dawkins is dead wrong about this. But I'm trying to not interrupt his train of thought, to give him a fair hearing. Just like in a legal process, you're going to give one side a fair hearing before you decide he's guilty. And Dawkins is guilty of stupidity here, but we'll give him a fair hearing as much as possible in this discussion. So let's return back to our regularly stationed. a regularly scheduled program of Richard Dawkins opining more. So he said, all appearances to the contrary. The only watchmaker in nature is the blind forces of physics, albeit deployed in a very special way. A true watchmaker has foresight. He designs his cogs and springs and plans their interconnections, with a future purpose in his mind's eye. Natural selection, the blind and conscious automatic process which Darwin discovered, and which we now know is the explanation for the existence and apparently purposeful form of all life, has no purpose in mind. It has no mind and no mind's eye. It does not plan for the future. It has no vision, no foresight, no sight at all. If it can be said to play a role of watchmaker in nature, it is the blind watchmaker. I shall explain all this and much else besides. But one thing I shall not do is belittle the wonder of the living watches that so inspired Paley. On the contrary, I shall try to illustrate my feeling that here Paley could have gone even further. When it comes to feeling awe over living watches, I yield to nobody. I feel more in common with the Reverend William Paley than I do with the distinguished modern philosopher, a well-known atheist, with whom I once discussed the matter at dinner. I said that I could not imagine being an atheist at any time before 1859, when Darwin's Origin of Species was published. What about Hume? Replied the philosopher. How did Hume explain the organized complexity of the living world? I asked. He didn't, said the philosopher. Why does it need any special explanation? Paley knew that it needed a special explanation. Darwin knew it, and I suspect that in his heart of hearts, my philosopher companion knew it too. In any case, it will be my business to show it here. As for David Hume himself, it is sometimes said that the great Scottish philosopher disposed of the argument from design a century before Darwin. But what Hume did was criticize the logic of using apparent design in nature as positive evidence for the existence of God. He did not offer any alternative explanation for apparent design, but left the question open. An atheist before Darwin could have said, following Hume, I have no explanation for complex biological design. All I know is that God isn't a good explanation. So we must wait and hope that somebody comes up with a better one. I can't help the feeling that such a position, though logically sound, would have left one feeling pretty unsatisfied. And although atheism might have been logically tenable before Darwin, Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Whoa. I thank you for forbearing with me this far to hear it, but this lays out why Darwinism and design are problematic. Okay, I mean, this lays out the issue. Design is problematic for many atheists, maybe not all. Like the philosopher David Hume, it didn't seem to bother him. I need to point out, you know, I have literally asked some atheist, one in particular, Matt Dillahunty, comes to mind. I asked him, I said, okay, let's say you're blind and then Jesus came along and healed you, just like in John chapter 9. I said, would you follow Christ the rest of your life? Would you believe a miracle happened? And he just said no. And I was in a debate with him. And he took offense to the fact that I pointed out. It's like, dude, if you won't believe that, then nothing will persuade you. And he really took offense to that, but it's in some of his videos. He said, well, how do you know it's not space aliens that created the miracle, et cetera, et cetera? Well, why can't you find a natural explanation? I'm like, okay, dude, you know, if that floats your boat, that's what you believe. But that's not for everyone. At some point, someone might think this is the real deal. And I need to point out the irony here about him insisting on all the evidence. His domestic partner is a dude, and Matt Dillahunty insists that the guy's his boyfriend is actually a girl. And Andrew, what was his name? Andrew Wilson called him out on it during a debate. Matt Dillahunty walked out, rage quit in the middle of the debate. getting called out on it. So, I mean, some of this stuff is really way more subjective, and people just have an emotional commitment rather than being, I think, more careful with the facts and even probabilities. I mean, let's say would that at least, if you saw probability being violated, would you at least think that the balance is starting to tip a little bit more in one direction in light of the evidence? And some people would say, well, no, that's just not enough. They could always keep saying that. And it's like, okay, if that floats your boat, I'm not gonna mess with your freedom to choose what you want to believe. That just doesn't work for me. So anyway, now let me try to move on. And this is such a pain to get this to move. So now there have been a variety of arguments to criticize arguments from design. One of them is saying that biology is poorly designed and engineers wouldn't ever design anything like what we engineers would make. Those statements, by the way, are mostly made by evolutionary biologists, not by real engineers. So let me give some illustrations here of that. So here is an example of something funded by the $1 billion quantum mechanics initiative at in the United Kingdom. This, as we know, GPS is a big technology. It enables all sorts of things. They're trying to find alternatives to global positioning system where you need satellites, etc., to make the system work. So they're trying to find something that doesn't require satellites because satellites could be jammed. So the military is very interested in very precise navigation devices that aren't what they call inertial compasses. This one's a quantum accelerometer compass. It's supposed to be very good. I mean, the ultimate intent is to make a very good one. Now, this device has to operate at close to absolute zero, so there are all these tubes connected to it, giving it liquid helium to cool it, or some sort of cryogenic fluid to cool it down close to absolute zero. And you could see all the wires and instruments. This is only a partial photograph of this. This entire compass would fit in a van, and it's nowhere near as good as what we see inside this little bird. This bird is an Arctic tern. It can fly all the way from the North Pole to the South Pole in all sorts of weather. And I can tell you as a pilot, flying out in the water is scary. And if you only have a magnetic compass with no GPS, you don't have any of like the older forms of Loran or radio navigation, man, you just feel like you're toast. It's scary. People have died. Yeah, you could kind of try to use the sun angles just like the old mariners and all, but it's tough. It's not an easy thing to do. So this bird here, and birds in general, not only do they have magnetic compasses, they also have the equivalent of various accelerometers, just like you would in an airplane, attitude indicators. I mean, they could not fly unless you had all those instruments naturally in there, and they just do it so effortlessly. They also have a way of using, okay, so the magnetic compass is inside the bird's eye. Now just compare that to the size of this compass here. And the physicists who've analyzed the magnetic compass in the eye are like, we can't build anything like that. Not even our best laboratories can build anything like the compass in the bird's eye. So for those of you who wonder at quantum mechanics, this is a marvel of quantum mechanics and the ability to control subatomic particles. Yes, subatomic particles, namely the electron. That bird can control the up or down spin of the electron, and it senses when those spins change because of the magnetic field, it creates what they call a hyperfine transition. And it took a Nobel Prize winner in, I think it's Albert Michelson, who famous Michelson-Morley experiment. In another experiment, he was able to detect hyperfine transitions. Up until that point, He was the only scientist that could do that. This is how sensitive the instruments are. And yet that bird is able to detect hyperfine transitions with the changes of the spin of the electron. It's able to detect it, and as far as we know, biology is also good at controlling the spin of the electron. Our best chemists and physicists and engineers cannot build devices of that sophistication. And so you're like, oh, wow, something, whatever built that seems to be collectively more intelligent and more capable than anything that we can build, even in our space age, computer information age technology. We cannot surpass that. Even though we can build atomic bombs and spaceships, we cannot build anything this precise. And the physicists are noticing it, particularly the biophysicists. And so there is design. Now, one line of argument by people, evolutionary propagandists like Jerry Coyne and Nathan Lentz and John Weiss and Francisco Ayala, is biology is incompetently designed. None of those guys are engineers. They don't understand engineering principles. They'll just say, well, look, biology is so fragile it breaks down. I'm just like, dude, you are not an engineer. Very high performing systems break down. The more high performing at the edge of physics, it is more likely to break down. So I'll give you an example. Dragsters. Dragsters are the race cars that are meant to accelerate over a quarter mile. Many times the race lasts less than 5 seconds, often less than 4. Now, the dragster engine can develop 11,000 horsepower. 11,000. Now compare that to a typical car with about, say, 100, 150 horsepower. A nice fuel economic car would be 100, 150 horsepower. That dragster could have up to 100 times more horsepower. But each time you race that dragster, just 4 seconds later, they have to take it back and rebuild the engine. It's not a full rebuild, but sometimes they do see that the parts had gotten stressed so much that you have to do a full rebuild. But at the very least, they have to do a partial rebuild just for 4 seconds and a quarter mile of distance. Now, are we going to say that the dragster is poorly designed because it breaks down so easily? Absolutely not. It's a wonder of engineering. And that engine probably cost $250,000 at least. And then if that seems expensive for an engine, $250,000, think about Formula One engines that probably cost around $10 million. And those things don't last very long. So this whole criticism that biology is poorly designed because it breaks down so easily, it's a bad argument. The biophysicists know that biology is more perfect than we imagine. It exceeds our very best engineers and scientists when it is in the area that is optimized, such as this bird that I showed. Let me show it again. It is optimized to the limits of physics. So yeah, it is kind of fragile, but this is the trade-off. If you want to build high-performing aspects of a system in say one dimension, it will be fragile, and it will not be operating very well in others. This is a known trade-off in engineering, what we call conflicting requirements. So now let me see another picture. Oh yeah, okay. So this again talks about the hyperfine transitions and the electron spin. Now plants, you see this LED? These LEDs are able to function because of something called excitons. Excitons are advanced semiconductor physics. Excitons are composed of an electron paired with a positively charged electron hole. Positively charged electron holes are what we call quasiparticles. The field of quasiparticles in physics has totally exploded. Nine individuals sharing, at least 9 individuals sharing 4 Nobel Prizes have won Nobel Prizes related to quasiparticles. The first being people like Shockley, who discovered the transistor effect. Now, we didn't really understand it in terms of quasi-particles like we do now, but it is through the study of quasi-particles, and there's a zoo of them. When you go to school and you study chemistry, you think about, electrons and protons and neutrons. There's so many quasi-particles, and it's raised a very fundamental question in physics. It's like, well, are there any real fundamental particles at all? Or are they all quasi-particles? I mean, you can break an electron. Duncan Haldane won the Nobel Prize for showing that you can subdivide an electron into a charge-on, a holon, and there's one other, a spin-on, a holon, and a charge-on, something like that, a holon. Something, it could be subdivided into three. He won the Nobel Prize for this, and it's starting to raise questions about, are there any fundamental particles at all? It's still an ongoing debate. I'm not going to try to settle it here. But your light-emitting diode uses these exotic quasi-particles. And the quasi-particle I was describing that's composed of an electron and a positively charged electron hole is called an exciton. Excitons are advanced semiconductor physics. And when I was studying biochemistry, in the later chapters, I saw they're talking about the biochemistry of a plant. And I started to see diagrams that showed the plant making excitons. And I was just like, I saw that in advanced graduate school solid state condensed matter physics for semiconductors. And the plants are using advanced semiconductor technology, but it doesn't stop there. You all are aware of the drive toward green energy or renewable energy, and we're trying to build solar cells. And the solar cells, in order to transport energy, have to do it also with excitons. What they have found is the solar cells cannot transport it with a level of efficiency that plants transport excitons. Again, those excitons are what enable those LEDs to work. So so the plants are using those excitons to transport energy. So there's a similar principle here with the LED, taking the energy stored in the exciton, and I may be getting this backward. There's something called recombination, where the excitons are destroyed and you get light. The plant cell does the reverse. It takes light and builds excitons with it and transports it. Solar cells try to do the same. The exciton transport in plants in the process of photosynthesis is near 100%. Solar cell makers would wish they could do something that good. And the physicists who study this, the engineers and physicists who actually work on these problems are just like in awe. It's like, wow, that is really amazing. And this is the thing that galls me. It's these people who aren't engineers, who aren't physicists, who are opining about how evolution explains this through physics. And I'm just like, dude, you have no, and that the way biology is built is bad engineering. Just like, dude, just because you're an evolutionist doesn't give you a license to comment about stuff that is so far out of your field that would almost be excusable if you were right. But you're dead wrong. You guys are dead wrong. And this has kind of come to the forefront because evolutionary propagandist Nathan Lentz, and along with his enabling buddies, are saying that the human body is just terribly designed, it breaks down, and I already refuted that. Okay, top performing engines break down, systems break down if they are top performing. That's just by the way, that's just the nature of how physics will work, dude. And Nathan Lentz isn't a physicist, but he is a pretty accomplished propagandist, and kind of in a dastardly way. But he is talking about how the human body is so poorly designed. But enter Elon Musk, who kind of found out the hard way. Elon Musk is a trillionaire. Now, Elon Musk bought Twitter, which is now X. And Twitter was valued at $44 billion when he bought it. Now it's only valued at maybe $22 billion. But if you're a trillionaire, that's just like, oh, well, it dinged me a little bit, but I could survive losing $22 billion because I'm a trillionaire. And Elon Musk is building this this robot called Optimus version 3, and you could barely see it. It says Tesla on it. And Elon Musk said, this is the most difficult engineering problem Tesla has ever faced. The most difficult. To try to build a hand for the robot, he said 80% of building that robot, the engineering investment was in building the hand. And he realized, as he and his engineers were trying to build this, he said, the human hand is a very high bar for engineering, a very high bar. And so that goes against, one evolutionary strategy to say, well, if there's a designer, he's incompetent. We're seeing the opposite now. The biophysicists like William Bialik, who wrote textbooks on biophysics, and he is a National Academy of Science member, a Princeton professor, very top tier. He's saying life is more perfect than we imagined. Life is more perfect than we imagined. So yes, even though we don't have the capability of a spaceship that can fly to Mars, we have the capability to build spaceships. So even though we can't move as fast as a dragster, we have the ability to build a dragster. A dragster cannot build a human being. And that seems to be lost on these evolutionists who really don't know engineering, nor do they understand physics. I've yet to meet an evolutionist that has anywhere near the understanding of a graduate level physics student. I've yet to meet an evolutionary biologist that even has a graduate degree in physics, and he's going to opine about physics. Or how about even a degree in engineering? The only evolutionist I know that had a degree in engineering was, I think, John Maynard Smith. And Smith was actually a bright guy, and on his bookshelf, you could tell he was thinking about this. On his bookshelf, he had Michael Behe's Darwin's Black Box. So there you have it. Elon Musk, who built SpaceX and Tesla. Biggest engineering challenge for Tesla has been building a hand. So now when you see a hand now, you'll think this is $1 trillion engineering in your hand. Don't listen, disregard what those evolutionists who keep opining that we're poorly made. And so I mentioned Bialik. Let me just show you a little panel of Bialik here. This is William Bialik, Princeton University, and he gives a popular talk. It's more perfect than we imagined, a physicist's view of life. So with that in mind, we are well designed. So the design argument is now facing us. Now, did Darwin explain this? So in passing, people might complain, it's like, oh, Sal, you keep talking about physics and engineering, but that's not biology. I beg to differ. I do know that teams actually want to know what biology is. That means they want to understand what are the parts of biology. How do those parts interact? The skill sets that they look for that I've seen primarily are biochemists. And somewhere along there are the engineers and physicists, computational scientists, mathematicians, etc. The one skill set that's not really needed for top tier cutting edge teams researching biology is evolutionary biologists. What are those guys going to do? They're going to just share, oh, we think, dinosaurs evolved into birds. It's like, well, how useful is that to understand how life works? And they have all these speculations. They admit it's like they can't prove that this evolved from that, etc. And it's like, well, that's not really good to be able to understand how biology works. So let me just share something. Here's one from MIT Technology Review, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, an institution that is near and dear to my heart. So let me just read it. Why life is physics, not chemistry. The idea that life boils down to chemistry is being usurped by a much more ambitious idea, say two of the world's leading biophysicists. And together they say that biologists need to think about their field in a radical new way. As a branch of condensed matter physics. Biology is condensed matter physics. My specialty in physics was condensed matter. Condensed matter being liquids and solids generally. And obviously, if you're doing semiconductor physics and like stuff like LEDs and all these fancy high-tech devices, they're generally condensed matter physics. Condensed matter physics, just the semiconductor industry alone is like a $500 billion a year enterprise worldwide. I mean, it's just gigantic. This is real science. What good is studying phylogenetic trees that you can't prove are really true anyway? Which is what most evolutionists do. They just generate lots of speculations that aren't really provable. What good is that? And yet they're going to opine about, they're going to talk about how physics does this or that when it doesn't. They can't prove it. They're going to say about how biology is poorly designed, and they don't know what they're talking about. They're not engineers. They don't know condensed matter physics. They don't know engineering. Now, credit Richard Dawkins. I'm going to give the guy some credit. He at least has resisted this idea that biology is poorly designed. He said he really has a lot of sympathy for William Paley because Paley saw the designs of life as being extremely special and awe-inspiring. So Richard Dawkins is at least halfway right. Biology is not poorly designed. He should be sympathetic to the idea life is more perfect than we imagine. Your hands are far more sophisticated than trillionaire Elon Musk, with all his resources and all his technology and engineering, can build. He said, and I did a show on this, he said, this is a very high bar. This is a very high bar. It was the hardest project he ever worked on for Tesla. So, this raises the problem, how did this come to be? I'm just laying this out here, and it's a delight to talk about it in terms of physics and engineering. And by the way, to add insult to injury, Daniel Dennett, a philosopher himself, says, biology is engineering. And I think, let's see if I have this. There it is, chapter 8 of Darwin's Dangerous Idea. Biology is engineering. Biology is engineering. Biology is condensed matter physics. It is engineering. It is not evolution. It is not evolution. You don't need evolution to understand biology. You need condensed matter physics and engineering. I mean, was Elon Musk saying, oh, we had teams of evolutionary propagandists helping us to solve the problem of how to build a robotic hand? No, you need engineers and physicists, and very pretty top tier. Just watch my video on Elon Musk. So, what has evolutionary biology done to explain this? Darwinism has been the primary explanation for the complexity of design. So you have a camp of evolutionary biologists said, well, there's no need to explain design because it doesn't exist. It's lousy, the way biology is constructed. That's all, that line of stupid reasoning is being refuted by the biophysicists. And Dawkins is actually more closer to the truth by saying biology is actually pretty well designed. It's awe-inspiring, and it should be. And so, well, okay, so random changes. So when a parent passes DNA to the offspring, it is random. You can have copy errors. So let me see if I have a picture of a scribe. So I kind of like this picture of see if I have a picture. Yes. So just imagine if you're having a copy process here, and this is a picture of the scribe where he's copying one document to another. You can imagine that in the process of copying, you can make a mistake. And it turns out because of things like chemistry and quantum mechanics and thermodynamics, etc. In the process of a child being born and inheriting the copies of some DNA from the father and some DNA from the mother, some of those copies could contain copy errors. This is inevitable, and this is based on physics. Now, it turns out the fidelity of the copying is pretty much at the limit of what's possible in physics. And if it's not at the limit, it's pretty close. It's not easy to do that in a noisy environment where you have lots of random Brownian motion and dealing with quantum effects. There is a lot of proofreading in the copying of DNA that helps reduce the errors, but there are copying errors. Now, I would like to ask you, if you took the blueprints of a car, so DNA is the blueprint for the proteins in biology. Now, it's a little bit of an errant view to say DNA is the blueprint of all life. We're finding there are other mechanisms of inheritance where information is stored outside of the DNA, such as in the sugar code, but that's a whole nother story. But just suffice to say, let's say the blueprints of life have to be copied from parents to child. There's going to be copying errors. Now, whenever you have errors, like say in describing a blueprint, let's say you got the numbers wrong or the diagram wrong. So now consider this car. This is a Lexus here. And if we had a blueprint of the parts and then how to assemble it, and we just made random variation to the parts, now do you think this is going to be, what are the chances you're going to be able to improve upon that design and have a functional car? Most likely, it will not. At best, you hope that the variation will not be too damaging. You'd still have a functional car at the end. And on the other end of the spectrum, the car is totally functionless, and really, at some point, it might not even be possible to even assemble it, to even have the semblance of a car that might possibly run. So there's a principle here. In engineering, I'm just going to give you a very simple one, and you don't even need to be an engineer. It's far easier to break than to make. So if you make random changes, you're more likely to break a working machine than to improve it. This is so logical. Now, I've said the way technology has progressed is that when we have if we have a blueprint, say for a car, either it's a physical blueprint or really just a collective knowledge of how to build a baseline car, you can tinker around and change, maybe tinker around in at least in your head or the planning of the engineers. Let's say, let's try this and see if it works. Let's try this and see if it works. You can tinker around, but if you mess up, you can go back to your baseline blueprint. You can go back to your baseline blueprint. Therefore, even when, just like this ratchet wrench here, and from your viewpoint, this is a clockwise rotation, even though from my perspective, it's counterclockwise. But if we say clockwise is building progress and advancing technology and improving a design, even if you have, let's say, random changes, random inputs that would actually make the design worse, the ratcheting mechanism in here is able to filter out the bad and preserve the good. And hence, what we have seen in the rise of technology is, even though we've tinkered in our heads and had failed experiments, like Edison had like 1,000, 10,000 experiments building the light bulb, but he was able to kind of crawl up incrementally and preserve, the advancements. And if something was a dead end, he'd go another path, but he at least had something, a baseline to keep building on, and hence we have light bulbs. And that's a really nice thing to have light bulbs. And then same for so many other technological innovations. So this ratcheting idea, you can have some random inputs, and if you have a way of filtering it out and preserving the good and getting rid of the bad variations, you can improve upon pre-existing technology. And so Darwin thought, hey, why don't we just try to do this? And, if nature does this, this should work out real well. And so he came up with his theory of survival of the fittest. Actually, the original title was natural selection. And later, it has been also labeled as survival of the fittest. But there is a deep flaw in that. What he failed to account for, in the engineering world, you're going to do everything you can to at least preserve a copy of your baseline technology so you can build upon it. In case your attempted modifications fail, you can always go back to the baseline, start over again, and keep doing that. And then you can move forward. So we have seen all sorts of things improve over time with that approach. Darwin thought you could extend that to biology. And if biology did find that, if the process of inheritance across generations followed that principle, then yes, there would be improvement through survival of the fittest. But there's one flaw, one deep flaw that almost everyone has ignored in the evolutionary biology community. That flaw is the condition where all of the children, on average, have slight defects that the parents didn't have. So even if the child had one improvement, but then had 99 defects that the parent didn't have, if that's the average case, then the ratchet will go in the wrong way. What has made the difference now, and why I'm coming forward, is the data over the last 15 years. Now that, the first genome sequencing cost $2 to $4 billion in the early 2000s. $2 to $4 billion to sequence one human being. Now we could do it for $100. Do you see now we can, with today's technology, actually see what's happening between parent and child? This is a game changer. We are now in a position to see that the children are having more slight birth defects than the parents. And there's been this project called the ENCODE project. We are seeing that a large fraction of the human genome can contain function. And this is still hotly debated, but I just want you to think, for example, that the human genome, the evolutionists didn't like the idea. People like Grauer, the evolutionist, he said, no, the genome can't be that complex, because if the genome's that complex, then evolution is wrong. He literally said, if ENCODE is right, that is the project that was exploring the functionality of the genome, he said, if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. You could kind of see the principle that if you have, say, computer code or some recipe, let's say the recipe or blueprint, and so many parts of the recipe are really critical. If it's a bazillion lines long, there are just that many more spots where you could introduce a random change and something can go wrong. So that's the problem with highly complex systems. So you saw the picture of a car. Look at all the parts of that car, of that Lexus, and all the places that something could fail. So if you have just random copy errors in your blueprints, those are all the places something could mess up. And one solution the evolutionists came up with is like, okay, we kind of know the size of the genome at about 3.3 gigabase pairs, which translates into about 6.6 bits, where each position of DNA counts for 2 bits. So you work out the math, it's roughly 6.6 gigabits of information. And they said, that's just, if all that's functional, evolutionary theory's toast. And so they tried to say, well, it's maybe only, some estimates were as low as 1 or 2%. So it's, it's still problematic. And without going into the detailed math, even if it were only functional 1 or 2%, this is still really bad for evolution, because it's far easier to break something than to make something. And they're having to deal with it. So just on first pass, just apply some common sense. The evolutionists, though, are really good at evading and doing lawyer tactics and confusing the issue and just putting all sorts of terms to make it appear they have some specialized knowledge. But if you look carefully at what they're saying, you realize it's just a smokescreen. Now, it takes some effort to get through that smokescreen and kind of tease apart all the stuff that they're just throwing, what we call chaff in the military parlance. It's chaff and smokescreen, but you can cut through it if you're determined to find it, and that was part of my job. And so basically now for $100, we can actually test the hypothesis. Now I should mention something again, using the analogy of, do I have it here? The ratchets. In the ratchet of constant technological progress, you can filter out all the bad in your design. So like, let's say you have, you made a tweak to the design and 100 things were bad and one was good, you throw away the bad. The problem is when you have a kid, when the parents give rise to a new offspring, they can't filter out the bad. So let's say that the child has 99 defects and then maybe one improvement. You have to take the defect along with the one improvement. You have to take along the 99 defects with the one improvement. Whereas in the technology industry, as we're trying to move technology forward, you can eliminate the 99 bad and keep the one good. That's because we can apply intelligence and say that was bad, this is good. In terms of Darwinian processes of survival of the so-called fittest, if all the children have all defects in it, you can't apply that model that Darwin tried to import from the progress of technology into the progress of biology. This idea that biology could just kind of work like an inventor in just improving his own design, when you analyze the details of it, it fails. So superficially, to the extent they were able to carry, the evolutionary biologists were able to carry the illusion that biology could work like inventors, just building upon their last invention and improving. To the extent that they have been able to perpetuate that illusion, evolutionary biology has progressed and seemed to be a solid science. But now that in the era of cheap genome sequencing, now that we can analyze the DNA for $100, which used to cost $4 billion 26 years ago, or $2 billion, whatever the number is, we can now put those ideas to the test, and the facts do not favor Darwinian evolution as advertised. It is a disaster. And I had mentioned the ratchet. Now, I cannot take priority. Okay, so the technology ratchet, assume that it's going clockwise from your perspective. It's the reverse of what I'm actually seeing. But say clockwise is progress. And then if the ratchet is set the other way, counterclockwise is degradation or going in the reverse, simplification and loss and deterioration, what my boss John Sanford called genetic entropy. Now entropy, used the word entropy in a figurative sense, not the literal physics sense. Remember, I studied statistical mechanics. Don't do that, guys. Don't use it literally. Use it figuratively. It's going in the wrong direction. And to that point, let me see if I could show a graphic here. This is in German, but it talks about Müller's ratchet. Müller's ratchet is basically the children, the offspring having slightly more damage than the parent. Now, Hermann Joseph Müller is, let me see, I'm going to take a little, I'll take a little risk here, see if I could show his picture. He won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Chemistry for studying, Müller won the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Chemistry for having studied the effect of mutations from radiation. And so let me show this picture. I don't know why this is showing it in German. It's kind of cute, honestly. So this is a picture of Hermann Müller, and he won the Nobel Prize. So who I'm citing is no slouch. He's a top scientist recognized by the world. He was the one that created this, that realized for just, I'm sorry to be technical here, for what they call haploid genomes, that this ratchet could be in play, that it's going to go in the reverse direction. And this is very, very disconcerting. Now let me pause this for a second. I'm going to go to the library back here. I'm going to grab a book. Just give me a second to do this. Forgive me. There is this book by geneticist Brian Sykes, Oxford University geneticist. So he's no slouch. He is concerned, in not so many words, with the equivalent of Muller's ratchet for the human male Y chromosome. He predicts that, and it says it in the title of his book, A Future Without Men, his book, Adam's Curse. Now, Sykes is famous for trying to do kind of the science that is kind of related to ancestry.com, being able to trace lineages. So he's found the male lineages and then also the female lineages. So there's something called Y chromosomal DNA that's passed only from fathers to sons. The women have no role in that. But because this is what they call, again, a haploid genome case, the Y chromosome is subject to this degradation of Muller's ratchet. And so this means, with counterclockwise being the direction of degradation, Muller's ratchet will degrade the Y chromosome. And Brian Sykes is not the only one to be concerned about this. Jenny Graves and others, that the human race could go extinct. Now, he estimates maybe 100,000 years, some others 200,000. But whatever it is, it's like, this is not inevitable progress. That should give you pause that first-rate geneticists are invoking Muller's ratchet, the haploid, what I call the haploid ratchet, for, that these are things that are only passed from fathers to sons. And that males are going to go extinct, and then therefore the human race is going extinct slowly, degrading. Now, let me point you to the graph here, and he's talking about the decrease in fertility. So over time, you'll see, for fertile here, over time, over generations, the fertility is just basically going to zero. Now, the shape of this graph is what they call a decaying exponential. This is not written by a creationist. This is written by an evolutionary geneticist. And this is what I'm saying. They will preach evolution and hold to it because it explains a lot of things in their head, but then they'll find anomalies like this. And it's like, guys, can you put two and two together? If we are deteriorating this like this, then why are we still alive today? Which raises the question, how did we evolve? Because we should be dead 100 times over. By the way, Alexei Kondrashov, who's an evolutionary geneticist, actually said that. He kind of quipped, why aren't we dead 100 times over? He tried to answer that question with some theory, and I think, as to the best that I can estimate reading his works, he hasn't come up with a solution except we have to have a radical re-engineering of the genome by our biomedical technology, because it's not naturally going to fix itself. Like, duh. Do cars fix themselves? Do the blueprints, let's say you mess up the blueprints of your car or the manufacturing process by some sort of random changes, is it going to fix itself? No. Same goes for the genome. Now, you saw that decaying exponential curve. I want you to see from this book, Genetic Entropy. I worked for John Sanford. His foundation has now been discontinued. He's in full retirement now, and God bless him. He's a famous genetic engineer. A very large fraction of the agricultural genomes, genetically engineered products around the world, are through his gene gun process. For that, his invention, the gene gun, is in the Smithsonian National Museum of American History. He made history with his invention. He's an engineer, and he used to be an atheist, became a Christian, and then a creationist. And of course, you can imagine all the reprisals from the scientific community that are Darwin lovers were very angry, and they have assailed his character and his achievements. they've tried to cancel him, as will happen. Sometimes when you tell the truth and people don't want to hear the truth, they've tried to cancel him. But he's a genetic engineer. He understands he's a biologist and an engineer. He understands it's easier to break than to make. And the reason you do genetic engineering is some of these genetic improvements will not happen unless you have an intelligence re-engineering it. I mean, he found this in practice. And so, of course, that would start to resonate with him as he began to explore the question of whether Darwinian evolution is true. And he set out in this book to challenge Darwinian evolution. Now, this book, it's a good book. For 2004, which is about 22 years ago, it was groundbreaking. But this is before all the revolution of gene sequencing, where we could now sequence genomes for $100 versus $4 billion. We actually know the truth of what was predicted here. I've had the privilege to help build upon this and improve some of the arguments and even make some corrections. And that was released in 2021, and there is still something in the works. We'll see if that clears. I've had the privilege of being a co-author to this, to some of the improvements to this book, and I'm sharing those now. But he most of this book is scientific, but he did delve into the Bible. If you take the ages of the patriarchs as described in Genesis and then throughout the rest of the Bible, you'll see like you have Methuselah over 900 years old, Adam over 900 years old, and then gradually all the patriarchs are lower and lower age. It hauntingly looks like the same graph of Brian Sykes. And I just cited Brian Sykes here. Now, this is apples and oranges to some extent, because this is the age of the patriarchs. This is the decline in fertility, but I want you to see how similar they look. That is the picture. That is the graph of degeneration. One by a former evolutionist who's now a creationist, and one by a well-known evolutionist. So this is what I'm saying. The best creationist arguments are being made by the evolutionists themselves, or ex-evolutionists, in the case of John Sanford and others. And so the one that Brian Sykes gave was Muller's ratchet, which is, we know it applies to haploid genomes. And I'm just saying the word haploid because the biologists out there will totally understand what I'm saying. Because I'm anticipating they might complain when I try to apply it to diploid genomes, but you can. Now, it's not officially in the literature called Muller's diploid ratchet, but it applies. It's still the same idea. You just need a little math to make it work out. I will cover that hopefully in another show. But let me see if I could illustrate, just to belabor the point. And I'm going to have to show kind of the diploid version of this ratchet mechanism. So let me just share my screen again. And this is in a debate I had with Dr. Dan, and I can't believe people they glossed over this problem. So let's say hypothetically we have a genome that's doing okay, and we'll just say that 0 means that it's the best it could be. That's just the reference point. So now what happens? So again, I point out this is the diploid case, but you can extend it using some fancy mathematics that include what's called the Poisson distribution. So let's say at generation 0, the parent has only no mutations. Okay, that's the starting point. And if each of the children have 100 random variations on average, you'll get some kids with 60, 70, okay, let's say it's 80 variations on average, then you'll get a spectrum of some that don't have as many and some that do. According to the Poisson distribution, you're not going to get a clean, you're not going to get a genome that doesn't have some defects in it. So you had the parent with no defects and now you have all the kids with defects. So now let's apply survival of the fittest. Remember, survival of the fittest is really survival of the least damaged. So we're going to get rid of, okay, so the parent dies, and technically that is the most fit genome. So all you have now is the kids. And so we can eliminate the worst offenders, the ones with the most, and so the least damage survives. Okay, it's the one with 60. So you could see that Darwinian evolution in this case is not going to work to keep building up progress. And so we're just going to repeat the process over time. So now the next generation, we'll just label it generation 1. The prior generation was 0. And we're going to repeat the process. We're going to add 80, an average of 80 mutations. And, some will have more than others. And we're just going to eliminate the ones that have the most and preserve the one with the least. But it's still increasing. That number is now 120. Now this is for illustration purposes. I chose those numbers not arbitrarily because it is estimated that anywhere between 80, there are new defects anywhere in the range from 80 to 100. That's the ongoing 80 more copy errors between parents, a set of parents and their children. 80. And so you can see this is not going to reverse. This, again, is what I call the diploid Muller's ratchet. It's just going to keep going in reverse or counterclockwise according to what you're seeing. Muller's ratchet, because Muller had done the mathematics both for the haploid case and the diploid case, for you aficionados out there who actually understand some level of genetics. But at a very general, intuitive level, it's easier to break than to make. All the mechanics that the evolutionary defenders and propagandists they'll throw all these terminologies and say, that's haploid, that's diploid. Look, dude, I was able to cut through all that nonsense. I had to study it, and it still boils down. It's to the basic principle. It's far easier to break than to make. And if you start throwing a lot of damage through copy errors, where you have 100 of them, it doesn't matter whether it's haploid or diploid. The genome is just starting to accumulate damage. This is not that hard to see, that over time, machines just tend to degrade and wear out. Unfortunately, some people have equated that to the second law of thermodynamics. Creationists, please don't go there. You can make some analogies to statistical mechanics, but only under special cases. But I just want you to come away from this from the basic principle intuitive. For complex machines, it's easier to break than to make. It's not that hard. But the evolutionists will try to do all this hocus pocus and be an illusionist and make you think that you're not actually seeing things clearly when you actually are. This instinct is strong because it's founded in reality. The illusion is not on our side who favor the idea of design. It's in the minds of evolutionists. That's where the problem lies. And so you could see that this will lead to inevitable accumulation of more damage over time. And it doesn't even stop there. There are more problems. Let me see if I can bring up my my next slide here. It's worse than that. Sometimes Darwinian evolution, Darwinian survival of the fittest leads to even do worse than that. And I think I'll talk about that. I'll see if I have a slide for Kanazawa that showed that high IQ women have a 21% more likelihood, 21 to 25% chance higher incidence of childlessness. And that means that the IQ of the human race is going down. And we have evidence of that also archaeologically, where we saw the brains of our ancestors being bigger. They're also physically stronger. Just an average person would be an elite CrossFit athlete by today's standards. So let me just show you, this is some comments by evolutionary biologists themselves. One of them's famous, Masatoshi Nei, one of the top rank, like at least in the top 5 in terms of citations in the evolutionary literature. He had this to say, and you could look up this article. I'm sorry for all the ads. It says, molecular evolutionary biologist Masatoshi Nei says Darwin never proved natural selection is the driving force of evolution. There you have it. Nei wrote the software that I used in graduate school called MEGA. I think it's Molecular Evolutionary Genetic Analysis software. And so he's very senior. And he's saying Darwin never proved his thesis. And yet, yeah, the popularizers like Richard Dawkins, who's nowhere near as accomplished as Masatoshi Nei, the popularizer says the exact opposite. He makes hundreds, probably tens of millions of dollars promoting stuff that even his own colleagues won't agree with. And but I'm sure Dawkins is laughing all his way to the bank. Dawkins is wrong. It's not a creationist who's saying that. It's an evolutionary biologist. It's so easy now to argue for design because the evolutionary biologists are making the case for us. Now, what are the alternatives? They'll say, oh, well, Masatoshi Nei still believes in evolution. Well, see, he got it half right. Darwin was wrong. He was right about that. But his alternative mechanism of just plain old mutation, which is just random variation, this is just, again, like taking random changes to a car's blueprint and just expecting something like a fine running machine to emerge. That's the flaw. But at least he got something half right. The Darwin was wrong. Now, let me see if I have some other. So I got Mueller, and I will talk about my appearance on. Let me show something here, just as a little bit of, just a little bit on a lighter note. I presented these findings some of these findings at a meeting at Evolution 2025 at the behest, at the encouragement of Dr. Dan Stern Cardinale. And I thought that was me extending an olive branch to him, which he basically returned it with my gesture with an insult, which is okay, that's the way it goes. But if you look at the official Evolution Meetings website, the Evolution Meetings is the #1 venue in the world for all. It's kind of like the annual pilgrimage to Mecca for evolutionary biologists. And I said, I'll speak there. I'll provide a presentation, and they let me speak, even though I'm known as a creationist. But because I've published in evolutionary biology, because my co-author is a famous genetic engineer whose invention is in the Smithsonian Museum of American History, National Museum of American History, because I have a co-author who is a top population geneticist and really a top evolutionist, that's before he became a creationist, Ola Hosger, they let me present. Praise God for that. And it turned out, so let me just show you. So this is the big Mecca. A lot of us had to present online because the travel expenses to go down there to Georgia from all over the world is very high. So I think it was a wise idea that they allow people to present both in person and remotely. Now, I wanted to go in person, but they had certain immunization requirements, and you can guess what I mean by that. I had to take certain vaccinations, otherwise I wouldn't be allowed at the meeting, and I refused. And we won't go into any more detail than that. But by the way, I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I have to get into school, I had to get tons of vaccinations. There are just some that I have issues with. Anyway, so I want to point you to, okay, they have a list of videos, and look who's on their official page. There's me right there. You can see my picture there where it says population genetics theory, and you'll see that's the moderator. I forgot her name. Forgot the name of that researcher. Anyway, for the year 2025, among the hundreds and maybe several hundred presentations made there, guess who got the most views for 2025? It was me. Now, for all time, unfortunately for all time, I do not have the most views. There's one that has gotten more views than me, and you have to question why. This is at an evolutionary conference, but they had a drag queen there, and he got more views than me. He's doing drag queen stuff, and that was way more popular than me doing science. But hey, I'm just trying to show what these evolution meetings are really about. But I'm glad I got noticed. I was criticized for it by Dr. Dan and Zach, which I thought was a very uncharitable thing, and I've half unfriended Dr. Dan for that. This is no longer friendly. It says in Ecclesiastes, there's a time for peace and a time for war. And so now I think they have laid down the terms of engagement now. It's no longer diplomacy. It is now open warfare. But I presented that there, and it did get a lot of views. Now, the thing is, I'm just going to belabor the point. I talked about, see if I have Masatoshi Nei's stuff here. I'll cover some of that. Okay, so let me show a picture of this hiker here. This hiker has a lot of gear. This means she is well equipped. She has a lot of equipment to be able to deal with all sorts of adverse environments. And I call this excess capability, versatility and excess capability. Now it's kind of hard to lug all that around because it's so much equipment. This is a very compelling picture. There was a hiker who was called the bikini hiker. She would go around. She became a YouTube personality because she'd go on hikes by herself, strip down into her bikinis, photograph herself, and put it on the internet. And you can imagine she got a lot of views. So she became known as, her name was Gigi Wu. She became known as the bikini hiker. Tragically, she died by freezing to death. I shouldn't laugh, but it's just hard not to laugh. I'm like, okay, look, you strip down to a bikini, and now you're in a cold environment, and you freeze to death. Now, that is not exactly the story. Tragically, she actually just fell in a ravine. She did have some winter gear that day, but she got so badly injured, and the cold weather came in, and she didn't make it. It's very sad. Condolences to her family and loved ones. But it's kind of become it's taken on the tragedy has taken on an apocryphal meaning that you don't strip down to your bikinis and expect to survive freezing weather. But you see, this is the problem. If you're equipped with a lot of versatility, let's say it's now a warm day, and you just like, well, why do I need all this extra gear? I can move much more efficiently if I become a bikini hiker. Now, I deliberately chose a cartoon just so to be in the interest of modesty here. But I just want you to compare this. The burden of excess capability and versatility comes at a price, and there's a tendency to just dispose of it when you don't need it. But then when you need it, if you've disposed of it, like say in a harsh environment, you could be wiped out. Now, this is a problem for Darwinian evolution, because there's a tendency to just optimize for reproductive efficiency at the cost of disposing versatility and excess capability that the species could use in the future. And it's so much easier to break than to make. And it's unrecoverable once you've lost it, if it's complex enough. And so, let me see what the next slide is. So the idea again, thinking of that excess capability, it comes at a cost. And so if the idea is one wants to reproduce as fast as possible, you want to be able to, you increase copying efficiency if you have smaller genomes, right? So if you have a book that's 1,000 pages and you're copying it by hand, that's more difficult than if you have to copy one sentence. So DNA, the process of inheritance involves copying DNA. So what do you think is more efficient to copy, a big genome or a small one? And so what would you expect and to happen is that the genomes are not going to get more and more, they're not going to get larger and more complex. They'll tend to be like that bikini hiker, getting small. And it turns out we actually had an experiment carried out in the 1960s, actually 1965 to be exact, by Saul Spiegelman. And it's called Spiegelman's Monster. It was a semi-artificial, it was an artificial life form. It's not a real life form, but it illustrated the principle of Darwinian evolution. So he had this thing that started off, let me just highlight the important thing. It started off with 4,500 nucleobases. That is a measure of the number of information. So you could, if you take each nucleobase as equal to 2 bits, that's roughly 9,000 bits of information. And then as it reproduced, it shrunk down to 218. So it says here, shorter RNA chains were able to be replicated faster. So the RNA became shorter and shorter as selection, that is Darwinian processes, favored speed. After 74 generations, the original strand with 4,500 nucleotide bases ended up as a dwarf genome with only 218 bases. The point here is that simplicity rather than excess capability and complexity is favored by Darwinian evolution. And we have that echoed with intelligent women not making as many kids as the less intelligent girls, all right? I mean, I don't know how to politely phrase that, okay? So we're getting dumber and dumber with each generation. And then also, you take that with the drive toward reproductive efficiency, the drive to become a bikini hiker. Well, yeah, it kind of works, and the dumb girl keeps reproducing very fast, but then come adversity, that lack of versatility will wipe out the species. Darwinian evolution doesn't work as advertised. And if you think I am overstating my case, in 2024, probably the number 2 evolutionary biologist in Michael Lynch, see if I could find it. He wrote the book, Evolutionary Theoretical, that's Felsenstein's book. This is Evolutionary Evolution of Cellular Biology, something like that. Oh, Evolutionary Cell Biology by Michael Lynch. And let me just highlight what he said. And you could find this book, the textbook, it's actually 2024, Evolutionary Cell Biology. Evolutionary Cell Biology by Michael Lynch. He's the number 2 or number 3 evolutionary biologist on the planet, according to what they call the H index of publications. And he says natural selection is expected to favor simplicity over complexity. Natural selection is expected to favor simplicity over complexity. We have experimental evidence of it. We have kind of the intuitive fact it's easier to copy something shorter than bigger. I mean, this is just like so obvious. And then we have Saul Spiegelman's experiment. Now we have a top evolutionary biologist saying that. And what did he have to say about Darwin? He said, I'm just going to quote here, the common view is that biological complexity represents the crown jewel of the awesome power of natural selection. That's Darwinian evolution. This is a peculiar assumption. There's no evidence that increase in complexity are intrinsically advantageous. Those are his words. I'll say advantageous in the Darwinian sense. He's basically saying Darwin, it doesn't, there's no reason to expect Darwinian process to build up complexity. So I mean, when you have the other side basically giving away the store, it's easy to debate them now. And of course, they'll come up with their alternative theories that are just as bad, but at least they're admitting the truth. They're trying to fix it with something that's even worse, but I'll take that. I'll take that. And they'll say, well, he still believes in evolution. You're misrepresenting him. I'm so like, no, I'm not. He still believes in evolution, and he's coming up with a stupider idea to fix the obvious problem in Darwinian evolution. And so you could see it's just going to be one stupid idea fixing up, a more stupid idea fixing a pre-existing stupid idea. This is the progress. This is where evolutionary biology is going. It's slowly going into the nut house, because they'll find like the pillar of evolution, Darwinian evolution doesn't work. They'll come up with a theory. They realize it's flawed. They'll come up with a theory that's worse. Like just pure random variation with nothing to filter out the bad. This is nonsense. It's even worse. And Lynch is of this view, whether he admits it or not, in so many words. It doesn't work. There's nothing experimental. So he substitutes one failed speculation with more failed speculations. But I will credit Michael Lynch for at least criticizing the obvious flaws in Darwinian evolution. This is why I'm saying a new day has dawned. We have genome sequencing telling us the truth, and we also have evolutionary biologists having to come to terms with the fact Darwin never proved his theory, and in fact it's worse than that, his theory's been falsified. And I still have critics like Zach Hancock that still cling to neo-Darwinism. It's like, you didn't get the memo. Some of your more senior colleagues have said neo-Darwinism's gone. Dude, this is just so hilarious. It's like, well, no wonder he doesn't want to debate me. He'd rather debate a numbskull like Paul Price than me, who actually knows some of this stuff, who actually has physics, engineering, and biology background. But Zach Hancock, wants to score a win, so he goes after easy prey like Paul Price. Anyway, sorry, sour grapes on my part. Shame on me. Anyway, now I'll point out another evolutionary biologist, Alexei Kondrashov. Now, I went to graduate school and took classes in graduate level evolution. Bioinformatics. I'm sorry, the class was bioinformatics, graduate level bioinformatics. In that class, you do learn a little bit about evolutionary biology, but then you have to. My particular professor was a staff member of Eugene Koonin and a colleague of someone by the name of Alexei Kondrashov. Kondrashov is a very senior evolutionary biologist who in particular studies the human genome. And let me show you what Kondrashov had to say. So he wrote this book, The Crumbling Genome by Alexei Kondrashov. And I'm just gonna read from the book. I'm gonna start reading here. Reverting all deleterious alleles, that is, all the bad genes, in a human genotype may produce substantial improvement to wellness. Like, if you can eliminate all the birth defects in our genome, it's going to improve wellness. He said, artificial selection in humans is ethically problematic and unrealistic. That is, what did they call eugenics? Where like what the Nazis tried to practice. They tried to eliminate people they deemed to be not as fit. So this is called the process of eugenics, and it's kind of genocidal if you want to practice it in the extreme, which what the Nazis tried to do. They committed eugenics on mass scale, which ends up being genocide. And so Alexei Kondrashov, it's like, well, it raises ethical problems, but it's also unrealistic, because I showed that even if you just save the very best offspring, because it has more defects than the parents, even a program of eugenics at best would just slow down the deterioration. It won't actually stop it. Now, naively, the Nazis believed that you could just keep building up the master race by selecting the best. That was kind of the eugenic mentality. Now, it doesn't necessarily trace to Darwin, but Darwin kind of set the climate where you could start thinking that way. And I don't know that Darwin necessarily did that, because people that tended to their flocks or tried to propagate plants, they all had to practice some level of, like, keep the best, toss the rest. Keep the best, toss the rest. So my boss in his former life was a plant geneticist, and he said, yeah, we had to throw away 90% of our plants and just keep the best. So you keep the best, you toss the rest. It's not necessarily Darwin's fault that people practice this. It was probably practiced long before Darwin. And then the Nazis kind of extrapolated that into their genocidal program. But Kondrashov is observing that, there are ethical problems with that, but it's also mechanically unrealistic, because you still cannot clean out all the bad. Survival of the fittest is really survival of the least damaged at best. And then, so what he says is the only way to fix this problem. And now again, this is an evolutionary biologist of high rank, who is a colleague of my professor. And I'm highlighting this. He says, thus it seems the only possibility to get rid of unconditionally deleterious alleles, that's the more correct term than genes, okay? It's the more correct term. To get rid of the unconditionally deleterious alleles, that's the birth defects, in human genotypes is through deliberate modification of germline genotypes. Okay, let me unpack that. The only way to get better kids is to take the parents' DNA and re-engineer, remove all the defects, plant that in cells, and then you get perfect kids. Now, there are actually technical problems to that. Again, my boss was a genetic engineer. Even in our best processes, you'll have many failures. In the attempt to redo the gene, you'll get a lot of defective genomes. You have to a lot of trial and error to get one success, a lot. And for the human genome, it's going to be even worse. And you can see this also does raise an ethical question. How many embryos do you have to sacrifice before you get one that works? Now, all the ethical problems aside, just think of this. If it takes an intelligent engineer, genetic engineer, to re-engineer the genome to fix its problems, does it occur to anyone that maybe it took an engineer to build it in the first place? You can repair a car. It's different than manufacturing a car from scratch. But it doesn't seem to occur to anyone. And even the genetic engineer, just to do a repair, the genetic engineering required to do a repair on the human genome is so monumentally difficult. Imagine then creating this from scratch. This is the level of design that is in the human body, which Elon Musk is finding out is just monumental, even just for the human hand. So how much of this have I done that, where they'll say, well, you're just bumping the Bible. I'm just like, well, how much of the argument against evolution have I made by appealing to biblical authority? I am a Christian, and on a personal level, I will appeal to biblical authority. But the reason I'm willing to accept the Bible is the facts are staring me in the face. Suddenly, is when I read the long ages of the patriarchs, when we dig up archaeological, bones of prior humans, we see that their cranial capacity is bigger. That means they're smarter. We see that their bone density is higher. That means they're stronger. They were smarter. They were stronger. They probably were healthier. It's not a stretch to think they lived longer. And we are seeing ourselves get dumber and dumber over time. Now, let me see if I have this video. It's really comical. I mean, I'm sorry to be beating a dead horse But if someone wants to debate me on this, in the video description, you can find, I'm going to post a publicly available email address, which is disposable because it might get spammed. If someone wants to debate me live, we can work out the terms. It's really just going to be equal time. If there are any pro-evolution guys who really want to debate, I'll only ask that it be lengthy enough that we could go into more detail like this. But if you want to debate me, sure, why don't we try it? So let me see if I have this video here. Let me pause this and see if I could find that video. It's really funny. So there was this atheist who runs the channel Answers in Atheism, and he's going to try to explain through evolutionary theory how evolution is going to save the human race. Now, he's acknowledging that Darwinian processes can make us dumber and dumber, but he's going to advocate, he said, well, this is how it's going to work. So I'll let him speak. He's one of my more entertaining critics because he just says the stupidest things. I think all the substance abuse in his early life has really gone to his head. I think he's a little bit brain damaged. And, he'll go on and call me an idiot and all sorts of things. I'm like, dude, you're a high school dropout. And you're comparing yourself. You're saying I'm an idiot and you're a high school dropout. I'm like, dude, you have problems. And he embodies exactly, he's advocating that the human race is going to get dumber, and that's how we're going to save it. So I'll let him speak in his own words. The irony is apparently lost on him, what he's saying. So this is just really, this part is a little bit for entertainment. And so when I say the same atheist explains how the human race can be saved, this is really just funny.
Thing. It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. Thing. It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. Thing. It could well be the best thing for the human race to get dumber and dumber until we lose our minds entirely. I mean, that may end up being the most reproductive, successful thing, right? But so be it.
I mean, that is about the best, if you can call it, if there is such a thing, the best, most honest response to what I've said. And by the way, when I shared the stuff about Kondrashov, I confronted Dr. Dan last year or so, and I said, Dr. Dan, so you're reading what this very senior evolutionary biologist Kondrashov is saying, that we have to re-engineer the genome and to fix the problem. And I really was poking at him, at Dr. Dan, that is. I said, so can you tell me if, in your assessment, that means the human genome's improving? Does that mean Kondrashov thinks the human genome's improving? I mean, I was really rubbing it in because Dr. Dan asserts, no, it's not. He doesn't, he thinks this whole claim of genetic deterioration, genetic entropy, is a false claim. And I'm just like, look, dude, one of your colleagues is saying we have to re-engineer the genome. The genome is crumbling. So does that, in your words, do you think that this means the human genome's improving? And I got to credit him. He was like a lawyer that had really no defense. So what do you do when you have no defense? You kind of make up an argument on the fly that doesn't really work so well, but it's the only one you have. And he said, well, it depends on what your definition of fitness is. How do you expect me to answer the question if you don't give me a definition of fitness? And blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, I see through that. So I said, you give your own. You answer the question with your own definition of fitness. And I knew he'd be in a bind, because if he gave a silly definition of fitness, he'd get called on it. And if he gave one that was at least similar to the medical definition, he'd have to say, no, the human genome isn't improving. So he's stuck. And that was the end of the conversation. I knew I'd won my point. And he is an evolutionary biologist. And so this was years after. Okay, at the time I didn't have Kondrashov's. That's a year and a half ago. I'm so sorry, I'm tongue-tied. A year ago, I confronted Dr. Dan with this. But this ties to an interaction I had with him in a debate that was 6 years earlier. And I asked him the question, do you know of anyone that thinks the human genome is improving? Now, what do you do when you want to admit the truth, but then cover it up? So you want to have at least, you don't want to say something that you'll be called out on so easily in a debate. So you'll just say no and then change the subject. So what happened is I asked him, can you name anyone who thinks the human genome's improving? And he just whispers, no, and changes the subject. Totally. I'm just like, dude, that is such a bad faith way of dealing with the subject. If you wanted to get to the truth, you'd actually focus on that point. He just wanted to get to go on derail and mince words about, well, Dr. Sanford said this or that. And I'm like, dude, whatever I say or whatever Dr. Sanford says is ultimately like kind of pales in comparison to the question of whether the human genome's improving or not. But he wants to make it all about Dr. Sanford. And like, dude, whatever we say, however we say it, is not the point, dude. You want to complain about the way we phrase things or where it might be weak or could use improvement. There's time for that. But if the human's genome is deteriorating, you should be really concerned. But this is kind of the way someone will really trying to save face for himself and his colleagues. You're just going to come up with bad faith debate tactics. And it took a while for me to realize this. So what I did is the following clip is him in this debate. I had to amplify when he said no, and just before he changed the subject, I would repeat it just so it's clear he really did say no. But if you actually watch the debate, he said it so softly and abruptly changed the subject, you would think he never even admitted it. He did a good job of dodging the central problem. And because time was running out, I really couldn't take him to task for dodging the question and not exploring it in an honest scientific way. He would rather try to save face in the facing a flood of evidence to the contrary of what he's claiming. So let me share this clip that I explained how I altered it just to help him not get away with just pretending it's not a problem. So let me share it. Some of you have seen this already. By the way, that's Erica Gutzik-Gibbon. Some of you may know of her. So here it is. Can you cite anyone that thinks our genome's improving?
No, 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 no.
So it's not improving, like Dr. Dan, and evolution has changed over time. Is evolution has changed over time? Where do you think it's going, dude? And I invite the viewers, you can do a very simple AI search. Now, I'm not saying AI is authoritative, but you can look up the citations and you can say, is the human genome improving? And it says, the response I got was, the biological human genome is not actively evolving or improving on its own in a directed way. I mean, and I'm rather confident that anyone exploring the question ought to be sobered by results of what we're finding. I think I mentioned Kanazawa's work about intelligence and childlessness. Just for reference, I'm going to show this. There are all these fire trucks out there. See, this is Darwinian evolution needs an ambulance to haul it away, send it to hospice care, let it die, and let it be buried for good. I'm hearing all these sirens here. I happen to live, fortunately and unfortunately, like walking distance from the fire station, so we're going to hear it a lot. But this is the citation: intelligence and childlessness. And it's okay. Why don't I just read the highlights? More intelligent men and women are more likely to desire childlessness. More intelligent women, but not men, are more likely to become childless. Due to dysgenic fertility, the level of intelligence is likely to decline. And there you have it. This is Darwinian selection in play, and it's creating a slow moving idiocracy. This is not what Darwin advertised or the evolutionary biologist. Now, on some level, I could totally understand people don't want to think that the human race is deteriorating, that we would want to think that like our technology that's improved, our health, our genomic health will improve. Now, our physical health has improved because of modern medicine. The genes are deteriorating. So in some sense, yes, we are healthier, but that's because of modern medicine, not because of the improvement in our genomes. But it is disturbing to think, gee, will humanity die one day, as predicted by some people like Brian Sykes, who's an evolutionary biologist. At least it won't be the world that we know, because the human males are going to have a deteriorating Y chromosome, and Brian Sykes is not in isolation. There's also a very prominent evolutionist named Jenny Graves down in Australia. So I could see that even on just intuitive grounds, it's like, no, this is news I don't want to hear. And I'm going to take a slight metaphysical detour here and just say, in Christian theology, in the Gospels, Jesus said, heaven and earth are going to pass away. And in the Bible it says, heaven and earth will pass away, but his word will abide forever. And so the Gospels have always been pointing to the fact heaven and earth, human affairs are going to be gone one day. You need to put your trust in what will last forever. And the word of the Lord abides forever. The word that indwells us, if it's accepted and received as true, leads to eternal life. And you're like, okay, so Sal, you're being really evangelistic. Okay, so what are your alternatives? If there is no resurrection of the dead, it says in 1 Corinthians 15, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. That's your choice. But let us not be naive to think this Darwinian process is going to lead to inevitable progress, improving health. It doesn't agree with the facts. You have to come to terms with that and maybe decide how you're going to deal with it. But those are the facts. Maybe you don't like the theology I just put forward. It's like, okay, I respect that. But you got to respect the facts that we actually do have in hand. Darwinian evolution doesn't work. Richard Dawkins is wrong. Charles Darwin was wrong. It's deceived people for 150 years or more. It needs to go. Because if we are deteriorating genetically, we have to start preparing to, it'll affect our decisions about healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I got to point out something, Dr. Dan. said. He said, oh, we have all sorts of evidence of improvement. You know, he didn't use the word improvement. He said, increase of fitness, increase of fitness. He cited specifically, you know, we have proof of evolution. We have increase of fitness. Look at all these elephants that lost their tusks because they were being hunted by ivory hunters, and the elephants that weren't hunted and killed by the ivory hunters were those that lost tusks. He said that's an illustration of evolution and Darwinian selection at work. Now, just think about this. You can look up what you know what an elephant tusk does. Just Google it. It said there are a variety of purposes the tusk serves. It serves for digging, lifting objects, gathering food, stripping bark from trees to eat, and defending themselves. It has a use. And so now it's losing its tusk because the hunters come in, and Dr. Dan is saying, see, that illustrates you can get an increase in fitness. And like, dude, look, it's lost versatility. In order to just barely survive, yeah, okay, it lost tusk, but it lost capability. Remember, I was talking about excess capability. Think about that picture of the hiker. That excess capability, that big backpack, is a liability in certain circumstances, but it also provides life in others. This is, again, in engineering, what we call conflicting requirements. You want to be able to be mobile, but then you want to have versatility to be able to endure all sorts of environments. And so there's a trade-off here. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It's either going to be one thing or another. So here comes along the ivory hunters killing elephants with tusks, and now you have all these elephants without tusks. And Dr. Dan says, well, see, we've got an improvement because now it has survival advantage. I'm like, dude, okay, so what you're saying then is this is an evidence of evolution. And by way of extrapolation, so I'm going to say, okay, that's what he said. But the implication is this shows that evolution works. But I'm like, no, it doesn't. Because the process of deleting a tusk isn't the same as building one. You cannot use deletion of tusks as proof that that's the same process could build it. This is ridiculous. I don't know how dumb an inference that could be. You're going to use a process of deleting a feature as proof that it can evolve. Now, if it takes millions of years to evolve that character, and it only takes one generation of elephant hunters to delete it, that's very problematic. You cannot use examples of deletion as proof that you can construction. So the process of destruction is not the same as construction. And we don't have we have practically no experimental evidence that we can build something as complex as some of the systems that I published on. And I challenged evolutionists to tell me how that topoisomerase and the import-export process evolved for eukaryotes. They're like, I don't know. Natural selection. I'm like, give me some details. You can't be citing the deletion of elephant tusks as an explanation for how that evolved. I can get more into this, but I'm just giving you a flavor for how the wool and gaslighting is played on the public, where an evolutionary biologist can promote deletion of a capability as evidence that evolution actually works. It doesn't work that way. So, okay, we covered physics. It's condensed matter physics is biology is the new condensed matter physics. So now Dr. Dan has done some things. I'm just going to give you some future, a taste of the future of, I'm going to take him to task because he's very arrogant because he's an evolutionary biologist, like many of them are. I can point out his errors in basic biochemistry and he'll never retract. That's because they have to try to maintain an air of infallibility. I'm an evolutionary biologist. I'm a scientist, and like, I know it's right. Anyone who disagrees with me can't be that knowledgeable, and he'll try to put me down. And see, as I talk here in the monologue, I'm a little bit more lucid. In a interchange, I will stammer and stutter, and fish for words. That's just the way that I am. It doesn't mean the facts aren't on my side. So Dr. Dan's always quick to the draw. He's always wrong, but never in doubt. And so he's confidently asserting. So at least on the public stage, he looks, correct. But, I've reviewed what we've said over the years, and I'm like, the dude is clueless about some things. He doesn't realize he said things. And so I'm just going to give you a little bit of a taste of something that's going to come up. And I talked about Mueller's diploid ratchet, and I actually worked on that problem, and I was very honored when Dr. Sanford displayed it. So I'm just going to show the screenshots of this for the aficionados. If they want to press the pause button to slow this down and have it wind, they can go and see if my math is correct. But I took a lot of exception to Dr. Dan saying that my calculation was wrong. Now, I need to point out, first, my math background versus his. And I'm sorry to have to rub this in, but I do take exception to the way, again, I extended an olive branch, and he ended up using that opportunity to mock me, making all these hit piece videos. But as you know, I've studied electrical engineering and physics. And this is a law. These are the laws of electromagnetic electrodynamics. And so it's in physics, but electrical engineering wouldn't exist without the technology represented in these equations. So I had to study electromagnetic theory. Probably the most consequential of the equations is this one, the Maxwell-Faraday equation right here, the third equation. We wouldn't have electrical generators and motors if we didn't have Faraday's law of induction. This is how big it is. So just imagine your life without electricity. This is how consequential this was. I had to study it. This is the math I studied. If you take electromagnetic theory, you're able to develop what they call D'Alembertians, and you can actually derive Einstein's theory of special relativity. Now, this is a derivation. This was a problem assigned on my first day of graduate school at Johns Hopkins, and the professor gave us little pointers how to solve it. Years later, I would try to recapitulate it, and it took me 8 weeks to do it kind of by hand and more rigorously, where I'd spend an hour a day working on the problem. So I could go from here to here. Now, what's the implication of this? Well, you can make atomic bombs. The consequence of this is basically nuclear energy. So it may all look all esoteric, but it has an impact on the modern world, for better or worse. But this is very powerful, because from electromagnetic theory, you can derive special relativity, where you get the famous E equals mc squared, which is the mass energy equivalence, which leads to nuclear energy. This is non-trivial. This is the sort of math I do. And Dr. Dan has the gall to say my calculations were wrong. The calculations were high school algebra, dude. High school algebra. And I'm going to do another show on this and say, look, you're out of your depth, man. You're out of your depth. This had relevance to genetic deterioration. And he would just flat out said, you're wrong, it's wrong. Read Grauer. And by the way, I did read Grauer after he told me to and convinced me that it actually, in the process of reading Grauer, I realized he confirmed my suspicion that he's a total buffoon. His math sucks. So I'm sorry to pull rank here, dude, but you declared war on me, by the way you were mocking my olive branch scent out, and I'm done with that. You're going to get a taste of your own medicine here soon. And I'm just showing to my viewers here, my fan base, that I can do this math that he can't. And so I'm just going to page you through the proof that he said was wrong. I'm not going to expect anyone to understand it, and I'm going to spend an entire show going over it, and also why Dr. Dan's hero, Grauer, is a total buffoon. So anyway, let me just share this to close this out, because he keeps saying that I don't understand this. And that only goes so far until you actually get called on it. So this derives from Hermann Muller, who I mentioned, Nobel Prize winner, the father of Muller's ratchet, the haploid ratchet, but he actually built one for the diploids. And the proof proceeds from the Poisson distribution, and I went through the literature like Kimura, Maruyama, that uses the Poisson distribution, and I relate all the terms, and we'll go over this more in detail. But if you work the Poisson distribution, and this is from Kimura's paper, you can uncoil this and work with the Poisson distribution. There is a proof here that you can play in slow motion, and it is agreed to by evolutionary literature, by our Walker-Keatley and also Nachman and Kroll. Dr. Sanford, when he appeared at the big stage at the National Institutes of Health, he used my calculations here to make the point of human deterioration. And the formulas that I created appear in evolutionary literature, not because I created them, but I was able to rederive the proof for popular consumption as to how the evolutionists got those numbers. Again, I want to emphasize, I'm not the originator of this. I'm recapitulating it. It's in the literature, and Dr. Dan is saying my math is wrong, and I'm like, dude, I could cite 5 or 6 people that use that same formula, and they are way more senior than Grauer or yourself, and you're saying my math is wrong. And here's the proof that I'm correct right here, and I'm going to cover that next time. But dude, you're going down. This is an embarrassment, and I'm not going to let you forget it, because you criticized this analysis right here, where I said if we have even one birth defect per individual per generation, this is the number of offspring the female needs to have. And even if they're just 3, every female on the planet needs 40. And it goes on, the number of kids a human female needs to have increases exponentially. And he contested that. He said, you're wrong. You didn't read Grauer. And what I did is like, well, Grauer is wrong. His math sucks. He's an embarrassment. And you don't think that I won't see that? You think I'm not capable with my modest math background cannot see that, given that some of the derivations I've had to work through? This is barely above high school algebra, dude. And so I'm going to have to take him down a few notches for his arrogance. I mean, I do feel for him, because he's lived to defend a lie. And it's really hard to come to terms. It's like, oh my goodness, what if Sal's right? Then I'm the villain, you know? It's like, well, yeah. If you've lived your life for saying you're right, and then you find out you're the one who's in the wrong, that's a hard thing to come to terms with. Now, does that make me, does that make the guys on the right side like morally superior? No. This is like saying betting on a game, like say a football game. My team's going to win, and the other guy says, my team's going to win. But when the game is played out and the facts are the facts and the game is settled and you have the final score, one guy has the bragging rights. It doesn't mean that I was morally superior for having picked the right team. Maybe I was just lucky. And that is the situation. So he picked the wrong team to join and to defend, and now his team's the scoreboard's indicating his team's losing. It's just that simple. But you still feel like you've wasted your life. So I know it's a tough place to be, man. To come to the terms that the guy you've been kind of dissing on Sal, that he actually knows the math better than you do. And he's right. And not only that, the empirical evidence shows that Sal is right. I mean, I think that's a tough pill to swallow, dude. And on some level, I'm sorry that he has to go through that. It's not necessarily his fault, and it's going to be hard for him to repent because you've lived your life for a lie, and that's something hard to face. That your whole field has been just basically a farce. I was lucky enough to be in actual disciplines that have made a difference in technology, which is engineering and physics. I mean, these were easy bets to make. It's like if you're good in these disciplines, you can make a contribution to the betterment of society, because we had bazillions of experiments showing that this actually works. We do not have that for evolutionary biology proving it works. It actually works in the opposite direction. So, I feel for him. But this is now, this is war. But I did promise at the very end I'd talk about my work being acknowledged on Dr. Tour's channel, James Tour's channel, by so James Tour is a distinguished scientist, and he had another distinguished scientist by the name of Rob Stadler, who presented some slides that I had developed. Some of you have seen. So this episode by James Tour was aired August 15th, 2026. Oh, by the way, you could see sort of what YouTube recommends for me to watch. It's a little embarrassing. You can actually see what I like to watch. So let me just play some excerpts here, and then we'll call it a wrap.
So, in other words, these have not evolved. Therefore, the evolution occurred within a virus, and the virus passed it on. Is that the suggestion?
Right, or through interacting with other organisms and sharing pieces, parts.
Yeah. It's a tough thing to be an evolutionist these days. Hi, we're here again today as the Conversations group, and
about proteins. And this model would be that a protein and the gene associated with it, or genes associated with it, then diverge.
Okay, so the next segment is going to highlight my work on by Dr. Stadler on James Tour's channel. So James Tour is watching this, and he's participating in this presentation. So forgive a little bit. You'll get some extraneous stuff, and then you'll see my work presented on the channel.
Over time from origin of life until you get to the last universal common ancestor, and then diversified further from there to give us modern proteins, modern life. And they're saying, no way, that just doesn't make any sense. Looking at the data, what we have are separate ancestry. We have a forest of proteins, a forest of genes underlying the last universal common ancestor. Just to make this little pictorial to try to help explain it, I want to thank, there's a YouTube channel called Real Science Radio, and my friend Sal Cordova that came up with these images, and they allow me to share them. So thank you guys. But so we all know that cars, if you have an internal combustion engine in your car, you have pistons and you have batteries, right? And those have each evolved over time. Pistons have gotten better, batteries have gotten better. But absolutely no one thinks that batteries and pistons share a common ancestor, right? They didn't come from a unified part that diversified into these parts. Nobody would think that. And what we're seeing now is that that's exactly true for proteins, and therefore the associated genes behind those proteins. So here we have a topoisomerase protein model, and over here is a membrane channel that allows ions to pass through the membrane. And these are so fundamentally distinct that it's hard or impossible to believe that they could have come from some kind of common ancestor. It even helps if you look at the sequence of the amino acids that make up these proteins. So here's human collagen, and these are the amino acid sequence behind collagen, and then the human zinc finger over here, and its amino acid sequence. And this again from Sal Cordova, thank you, Sal, but he calls out the repetitive sequence behind collagen, and there's some repetitive sequence here behind the zinc finger, but you can stare at these codes all day long and not find any reason to think that they were derived from some kind of a common ancestor. They're just so distinct that you can't get here from here.
So there's no universal common ancestor for all proteins. This is a big problem for evolution, and probably cover that more in another show. It'd be good to actually apply biophysics to the problem and statistical mechanics to show that this is a really serious problem for evolution. And there has been some discussion that I could provide more inputs to the question that might be used on Dr. Tour's channel. I'm very honored that I got some recognition on this YouTube channel. And just again, for the critics out there say, oh, that's just a YouTube channel. Well, I published in secular peer review on related matters. So it's not just restricted to YouTube. And if I didn't face all the hostility of the evolution crowd, I would have been published substantially more. But we have gatekeepers that are, again, holding on to a dying paradigm that needs to be dispensed with, and they're fighting hard. They are fighting against truth, and they're using cancel culture to enforce the status quo. But the facts keep moving forward, and we thank God for that. So I'd like to thank everyone who's joined me today in watching this long presentation. Take care, and God bless you.